On September 4th, White House National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien said the Chinese regime has the most massive program among countries seeking to interfere in the U.S. election and has taken the most active role in political influence efforts. O'Brien told reporters at a briefing, "There's always going to be propaganda. There's always going to be efforts to influence us. We know the Chinese have taken the most active role." The National Security Advisor concurred with Attorney General William Barr's comments earlier this week that China, rather than Russia, poses the greatest threat to U.S. election security. O'Brien said he agreed with Barr's assessment 100%. In July, William Evanina, the director of the National Counterintelligence and Security Center, said that Beijing was ramping up influence efforts in the country by attempting to shape U.S. policy, pressuring political figures, and countering criticism of China. Evanina later said that Beijing would prefer Trump to lose the election, in light of the administration's increasingly hardline stance towards the regime. An expert previously told the Epoch Times that Chinese attempts to interfere with U.S. elections and politics, unlike Russia's methods, are focused on using economic incentives or coercion to influence business and political elites, given that these are the actors who shape policy in candidates' campaign platforms. However, Beijing's ambitions extend beyond any single election. Jeff Nyquist, an author and researcher of Chinese and Russian strategy, said in an earlier interview, "The Chinese objective is to embed themselves inside the West, and to become so powerful in their position there that nobody can say no to them when they want something." U.S. officials have recently sounded the alarm that the regime is targeting American business leaders and officials, pressuring them to adopt Beijing-friendly stances. O'Brien said the regime attempts to influence American business leaders by saying if you don't support us in the U.S., your companies won't have opportunities in China. O'Brien has also described the United States' approach to the Chinese regime as the biggest failure of American foreign policy over the past 40 years. On September 4th, at a White House press briefing, the advisor said that the prevailing mantra in the West had been that China would become more democratic as it became richer. So we turned a blind eye to Chinese malign activity, whether it's stealing our IP or engaging in unfair trade practices or bullying its neighbors. But in reality, the opposite occurred. China's human rights violations have gotten worse and worse over the years, O'Brien added, citing the communist regime's abuses against Uyghur Muslims and other religious minorities, its subversion of freedoms in Hong Kong, and aggression towards Taiwan. Meanwhile, Beijing has presided over an aggressive campaign to steal American intellectual property with the aim of replacing the United States as an economic superpower, O'Brien said. The scope of Chinese activity against the United States is relentless. We've never seen anything like it. It was nothing like this in the Cold War with the Soviets, he said. His remarks came as the Trump administration quickened its actions combating Beijing on a range of fronts, from security risks posed by Chinese technology to its military aggression in the South China Sea. O'Brien described President Donald Trump as the first president to stand up to the Chinese in 40 years, saying the administration has taken strong action in confronting the regime's unfair trade practices, theft of U.S. intellectual property, and human rights abuses. The administration recently sanctioned Chinese officials and a paramilitary group over their role in repressing Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. It's also sanctioned Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam and other Hong Kong and Chinese officials for undermining freedoms in the city.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says President Trump is looking into ways to prevent intellectual property theft by Chinese nationals and students. In an interview with DC radio show, Pompeo said, "The Chinese Communist Party has stolen hundreds of billions of dollars of intellectual property, and with that, tens and hundreds of thousands of American jobs. They've stolen this information, either by taking it through cyber means or by their people actively working inside of our places of research." Pompeo said previous administrations have turned a blind eye, and President Trump is the first to take it seriously. One of the hosts asked whether all Chinese students and researchers might be barred from the United States for a few years. Pompeo said not every Chinese student can be considered a spy, but it's absolutely the case that the CCP is surveilling Chinese students to make sure they're acting in line with what the CCP wants them to do. He said the measures could be rolled out over the coming weeks or months.
On August 2nd, when Shen Fang, a 70-year-old Falun Gong practitioner living in Shanghai, refused to open the door to 4 police officers who arrived at her apartment, they called up a locksmith and broke in. Despite her protests, the 4 pinned her down, grabbed her wrist, and scratched her hand multiple times to draw her blood. The blood sampling was required by the state, they repeatedly told her. One police officer shouted while covering his badge number, "The law doesn't apply to you guys. We're going to wipe you all out." According to Minghui.org, a US-based clearinghouse that keeps track of the Chinese regime's persecution of Falun Gong, Dozens of adherents of the spiritual practice Falun Gong have faced similar ordeals across the country in recent months. Some, like Shen, were visited by police, while others were forcibly taken to the police station for the blood draw with little explanation. Just a river crossing away from Shen's home, in the sprawling Pudong district, police also forcibly collected blood samples from more than 10 practitioners, along with their fingerprints, a recording of their voice, and a sample of their handwriting. If they refused to cooperate, police said they would be arrested, according to an August report from Minghui. Falun Gong, a spiritual practice with a set of meditative exercises and moral teachings based on truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance, has been brutally suppressed in China since 1999. Over the past 2 decades, hundreds of thousands of adherents have been thrown into labor camps, detention centers, re-education facilities, and psychiatric hospitals, where they are tortured to coerce them into renouncing their faith, according to the Falun Dafa Information Center. The recent blood testing especially raises concern in the context of mounting evidence that the Chinese regime is commodifying prisoners of conscience by forcibly removing their organs and selling them for transplant surgery. In 2019, an independent people's tribunal in London determined beyond reasonable doubt that imprisoned Falun Gong adherents were the principal source for China's vast for-profit organ harvesting industry. Upon releasing its final judgment in March this year, the tribunal found that the grisly practice has continued unabated. Such acts, it said, constitute a crime against humanity. The tribunal said in the March judgment, if the accusations are proved, they will inevitably be compared to the worst atrocities committed in conflicts of the 20th century. Chen Jiangang, a Chinese trial lawyer and visiting fellow at the American University Washington College of Law, said that the police's blood collection doesn't appear to be a routine physical checkup, but rather collecting people's biological samples. He told the Epoch Times, when the Chinese Communist Party persecutes people, they don't need the backing of the law. He added that the police's behavior were a breach of personal rights and extreme humiliation of one's character. They want to control you, to create psychological terror. Li Xiudong, an orthopedic surgeon and assistant professor at the University of Virginia School of Medicine, said that the blood collection is clearly not normal and likely meant to pave the way for identifying organ matches later on. He said, they are not there to ensure your personal health. Dr. Torsten Trey, executive director of medical advocacy group Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting, agreed that the blood testing is unusual. Trey said the police appeared to have administered a bedside blood test on Shen, a simple test often performed at the bedside, adding that it was likely that they were screening for possible organ donors. He told the Epoch Times that if they needed an organ for a blood type that is rare among Chinese, AB or O, then they might first screen and, if positive, make a more accurate test. Pang Yongfeng, a former human rights lawyer from Hebei province, who previously drew authorities' ire for defending Falun Gong practitioners in Chinese courts, said that the police's actions were undoubtedly illegal. Peng, who has fled to the United States, said if they were indeed collecting the blood samples for fueling an organ data bank, the police would be liable for intentional injury and intentional homicide. Minghui reports indicate that forced blood sampling has recently happened to Falun Gong practitioners in eastern Shandong province, the northern cities of Beijing and Tianjin, Inner Mongolia, the northeastern provinces of Jilin and Liaoning, and Henan in the country's east-central. On July 22nd, police in Gaomi City, Shandong, arrested 46 local adherents in an operation that mobilized over 400 officers. All 46 were blood-typed. According to Minghui, Wang Juan, a practitioner in Changsha City, Hunan, was arrested during a trip to Chongqing City in October 2019. After police failed to collect her blood sample at a local police station due to technical issues, she was sent to the Yoyang County Police Bureau, where an officer named Zhang Tao took her blood sample. I'm already on Minghui's blacklist, Zhang told her, referring to a compiled list of local officials who are active in China's persecution campaign. The officer declared that he was simply not afraid and said, I'm going to harvest your organs.
China's gross domestic product numbers have long been questioned by the international community due to its lack of transparency. Recently, data from leaked government internal documents from Dalian City of Liaoning Province reveal a grim picture of China's economy amid the resurgence of COVID-19 in different regions since July. While the global economy has declined sharply this year due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and most countries' economies have had negative growth rates, China has reported a 3.2% rise in its GDP in the second quarter, compared to the same period last year, according to its National Bureau of Statistics. However, the leaked documents obtained by the Epoch Times reveal that Dalian City's economy took a dive in the first half of 2020, and government debt was 10 times above the international warning level set by the European Union. One of the documents titled The Completion of Estimated Major Economic Indicators, issued by the Statistics Bureau of Luxiankou District in Dalian, reflected a much worse situation than the officially published data for the first 5 months of this year. On July 24th, the Liaoning Provincial Bureau of Statistics issued data stating that in the first half of 2020, Dalian achieved a regional GDP of 315.5 billion yuan, $46 billion, a year-on-year decrease of 3.5% at comparable price value. In the context of global economic decline caused by COVID-19 and the subsequent lockdowns, Dalian's reported 3.5% GDP decline is relatively mild. But experts have long questioned the veracity of China's statistics. Take Dalian as an example. According to data from the Dalian Bureau of Statistics, Dalian's GDP in the first half of 2019 reached 367.1 billion yuan, $53 billion. Calculated in absolute terms, then, Dalian's GDP in the first half of 2020 actually decreased by 8.6%, rather than the officially reported decline of 3.5%. The Dalian municipal government also manipulated GDP data. Dalian's GDP in 2018 and 2019 were 766.8 billion yuan, $112.1 billion, and 700.17 billion yuan, $102.4 billion, respectively. In absolute terms, last year's GDP fell by 9.1% from the previous year. However, authorities still used the opaque comparable figures to reverse the sharp decline in Dalian's GDP in 2019 to 6.5% year-on-year growth. The internal documents obtained by the Epoch Times further confirmed that authorities fudged their data. Leaked internal reports of the Luxiankou district of Dalian, which is one of its 7 districts, in the first half of the year revealed that Dalian's economy actually experienced a sharp decline, several times more than what was reported in official data. The internal report shows that in the first 4 months of 2020, the absolute number of social fixed asset investment decreased by 25.7% year-on-year, and the citywide growth rate was negative 17%. Total retail sales of consumer goods fell 20.1% year-on-year in the first 4 months, with a citywide decrease of 24.6%. Commercial housing sales in the first 4 months decreased by 53.8% year-on-year, and the city's growth rate dropped 14.8%. To sum up, the double-digit decline in economic indicators disclosed in the internal report reveals the truth about Dalian's economy this year. Not only has its GDP plummeted, but its economic situation is still deteriorating. It is worth mentioning that although the Statistics Bureau of Luxiankou District did not enter quarterly gross product data in its internal statements, it has preset a value of negative 3% for the GDP growth rate in the first 6 months. In April this year, China's Ministry of Finance reported that as of the end of 2019, the local government debt ratio was about 82.9%, which was lower than the internationally accepted standard of 100 to 120%, and lower than the 60% warning line put out by the EU. However, a leaked government document shows a much grimmer picture of government debts. The real numbers are disclosed in Luxiankou's Report on Work to Prevent and Resolve Government Debt Risks, submitted to the Dalian municipal government. As of the end of June 2020, the total debt balance of Luxiankou was 27.68 billion yuan, $4 billion, including the 13.292 billion, $1.94 billion government debt, and the 14.388 billion, $2.1 billion hidden debt. Our district debt ratio is 736.3%, and the hidden debt risk level is red, it noted. After analyzing the data shown on the internal report, China Current Affairs commentator Li Linyi said that the district government has actually gone bankrupt. Despite the huge debt, Dalian is seemingly operating normally. The leaked documents also disclosed how the local government plans on repaying the huge debt. The district government stated in the report that in 2020, it needs to repay 3.48 billion yuan, $508 million debt. However, it only has 100 million yuan, $14 million in budget to pay for it. The Luxiankou district government listed many tactics to find money to pay the remaining 3.38 billion yuan, $493 million debt, including withdrawing money from the banking industry and land financing, make full use of idle land, and taking land to finance through the newly formed State Development and Investment Corporation, the document stated. The resurgence of the COVID-19 outbreak since July has caused several areas in Dalian to be locked down again. Residential communities in Dalian were continuously sealed off by authorities. Many residents became unemployed and economic production came to a halt. Lee pointed out that the CCP's lockdown measures have worsened Dalian's economic decline.